thank you so much for joining us. Donna's going to put a couple slides up on the screen so that I can introduce our very special guest. And then we're going to talk some basketball, particularly what the heck is a basketball bubble. So Donna's going to flip those through. And obviously, you know, I'm the athletic director here, so we'll just pass that one quickly. I want to thank my dear, dear friend, Bernie McGlade, who is in her 13th year as Commissioner of the Atlantic 10, which is celebrating their 45th anniversary. Bernie also is a member of the NCAA Men's Basketball Committee, and she now can say she is the only woman on that committee. And obviously, as you read there, you can see all the accolades that she's had through the years, including working at the ACC. So Bernie, thanks for joining us this morning. My next dear friend, and remember, these are all friends because people are volunteering their time, in his 25th year of, as the Commissioner of the South Conference, Kyle Kallander, who also has an unbelievable career as a commissioner and his involvement on many, many NCAA committees. He also has served as the vice president of the Collegiate Commissioners Association, and you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. So Kyle, thank you for joining us. And hopefully no stranger to our fans out there is our first year head coach, Honey Brown, who's been with us as an associate and an assistant coach for 8 years, been an instrumental part of all our winning championships in women's basketball. So Honey, thank you for being with us today. And then last but not least, Mike Morell. And I know some of you have sent me some emails and texts. We just extended Mike's contract, so we're glad that we've got him with us for more years to come. He's in his 3rd year. He's been one of the top 40 coaches under 40, unbelievable recruiter, no stranger to the Atlantic 10 either, as he was there with Shaka Smart at VCU. So Mike, thanks for being here today. So we're gonna dive in. I already told our guests that I'm gonna throw out some softball questions, much like Chancellor Cable usually says when she's interviewing somebody. But before we talk about today, I've got to go to Bernie. Bernie, since, you know, I'm glad I wasn't the only woman in the room last March. Our Bulldog fans here are no strangers to what happens for selection week. Let's go back to March. You were in the room. Normally the committee is working on selecting teams. What happened in March when we shut down men's college basketball?
Wow. Well, do I have the whole time of the seminar to tell everybody what happened in that unbelievable window of time? We were all in selection, as you know, and COVID was starting to rear its ugly head on that Wednesday, the 11th. And I think if everyone recalls, that was the night when the NBA players tested positive. So we were in the selection room on the 12th, and many conferences were still in the middle of playing and, you know, had not even determined their AQ. And, you know, the decision was made to close down many of the conference tournaments. As a matter of fact, the A10 championship was in its 2nd day over at Barclays in Brooklyn. The Big East was in Madison Square Garden right there in the city, and the ACC was playing, and Big Ten. And, you know, collectively, the virus just really forced everyone's hand. So it was a very dynamic time period, certainly crushing, just crushing to be in that committee room with the 9 other committee members, and Dan Gavitt and Kevin White from Duke was the chair of the committee. And, you know, we had to make that tremendously hard decision. And obviously the Board of Governors had to make the ultimate decision to cancel the men's championship. So a lot of moving parts all at the same time. We were working through the night to get to that morning, and we're hoping against all hope that we wouldn't have to make that heartfelt decision, but it had to be done. And, you know, we all had to move on. And the next day we were all being shuttled out of New York. And to tell you the truth, March 13th was the last time that I was on a flight, when we all flew out from New York back to our campuses.
And Coach Brown, you're no stranger to the shutdown either. The Big South we had completed the men's basketball championship, but the women's basketball championship was going on. Describe what happened to you and our team last March.
We were actually on a bus on our way to shoot around to get ready for our game, our quarterfinal game against High Point. And the TVs were on the bus, and we were watching some things unfold, similar to what Bernadette was just referring to. And, games were getting shut down. And I think Brenda was actually on the phone with you, Janet, and we got the word that it was unfortunately going to have to cease, and the season was over. And we actually was near a rest stop, so our bus pulled over so that Brenda could go back, and we told the team at that point, because we didn't want them to find out over the TV or over the phone, because things get out so quickly. So it was a little bit heartbreaking, but it was, of course, the right decision, and just not the way you want to end your season, of course.
Okay, so now let's fast forward to where we are now. We've been a long, many months without basketball, months without student athletes and coaches really working with their teams. We started bringing them back in July. Kyle, last week, NCAA made some pretty important decisions and gave us some guidance about how to go forward. Would you mind summarizing those and talk a little bit so that we can get to how do we talk about bubbles?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe that we're still dealing with the issues. When it first happened, obviously it's a sickening feeling, but we thought certainly by the fall, we'd be through this and we'd be back to life as normal, but not the case. And so as the group of us were talking earlier, the slogan for 2020 is adapt. And so you certainly have to be flexible in terms of how you're approaching things. So lots of discussion this fall about what to do with basketball season. Do we start on time on November 10th? Do we move it to the 21st? Do we move it to the 25th of November? Do we go to December 4th? That was the date we were talking about. Do we go to January 1st? I mean, those were dates that are all on the table and was being discussed. And ultimately, the Basketball Oversight Committee decided to target November 25th. At least right now, and Dan Gavitt said it's an aspirational date because who knows what might happen between now and then. But the official start date is the 25th of November. So that removes 15 days from the basketball schedule. So now we're all scrambling to try to figure out what happened to those games that now need to be canceled because you're starting later. Do they get rescheduled? There's the MTEs a lot of teams are participating in, the multi-team events that take place in those first 2 weeks. Are those rescheduled, and what does that do to the rest of the schedule? Overlaying all of this are the safety protocols that you've got to consider. And so that does lead to the bubble discussion. So right now it's crazy, and I know the coaches are going to chime in on this, but trying to determine what that schedule is going to look like in late November, December, is really a challenge, and it's a huge scramble right now to ensure that you've got a representative number of non-conference games leading into the conference schedule. So obviously that leads, like I said, to the kind of the bubble concept and discussion.
So both Bernie or Kyle, either one of you, or maybe both of you could answer this. There's 32 conferences. Y'all are 2 of the 32 commissioners. Y'all are in a lot of meetings talking about this. How many conferences are you talking about bubbles as conferences? I mean, what are people thinking about this whole bubble concept that we've seen the NBA and the WNBA do?
I'll let Bernie go first on that one.
Sure. Well, the NBA and the WNBA obviously are the gold standard. They have had really outstanding success with both of their bubbles in Orlando and also at IMG Academy. That comes with a cost. It's unbelievable. They're spending millions of dollars a day to establish and to maintain the bubbles that they've both been able to create, which obviously have been very successful. The practicality of, campuses being able to do that independently, even in terms of the A5, the strongest financially, institution in the country would be hard pressed to be able to spend the amount of money that the NBA and the WNBA are spending to create their bubble. So, we are all watching those 2 bubbles unfold. We're taking copious notes. There's a lot we can learn, especially from the playing court proper and the spacing and the layout. And we're going to have to transition and take a lot of those concepts and use them in a transferable way to be able to approach whether it's a bubble or a pod concept that is, within the means of higher education, quite honestly, and our local communities and our campuses. So, there's a lot of discussion going on amongst all of us, but to be able to replicate exactly what those two groups have done is almost financially, cost prohibitive.
Yeah, I call it, the $1 million bubble,
Mm-hmm.
which is the NBA level. The $100,000 bubble might be, if we had everybody together in one location, we tried to create a bubble. That'd probably be more around the cost we'd be talking about as a conference. And to a certain extent, we're wondering if we could even accommodate that. But I think every conference in some form or another is considering or looking at the bubble idea, whether it's creating non-conference opportunities for their members within a bubble environment, or even within the conference schedule. Is there a way to do that as a conference? Certainly, we've been considering those. Haven't made any final decisions yet, but those certainly are options that are on the table.
All right, I'm saving a softball question for Mike Morell. Mike, you're part of some of the Big South coaches. I know I sat in on one of your meetings yesterday talking about concepts like this bubble, whatever. Last night, ESPN came out with a new term. They said, don't call them bubbles, call them controlled environments. Talk a little bit from a coach's perspective and your conversations with your fellow coaches. What are some of those kind of controlled environments based on what Bernie and Kyle said because of financially and testing? So what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think the fluidity of everything, once you really get down into the weeds of what these bubbles and these pods or whatever they look like, you start prioritizing things. And Kyle's been on a lot of calls with that group we have. That was our major deal, is prioritize, what do we want to try to build a schedule. And it all starts with safety. And once you start getting past that, you really find out there's so many other things that go into a bubble, or what Jeff Borzello is calling a controlled environment, or whatever it is. Bubble, as we know in NCAA basketball, this year has got two distinctly different terms. You can talk about the NCAA tournament bubble, which nobody ever wants to be on, or the bubble that we've kind of brought up here. So, what happens is, and I know what we found out on the group that I'm on, is the deeper that we get into what those bubbles look like, the more stuff that comes out from a safety standpoint, whether it's how are you going to transport your kids while they're there on campus, to how are you going to feed them, 3 meals a day and it be as safe as possible, because the days of just lining them up in a buffet line, those are over right now for the foreseeable future. So what ends up happening as a basketball coach, you end up just kind of becoming COVID police. And it can take a lot of time. And, on that group that I'm on, it's been really interesting to try to learn and understand how those other coaches feel. And for all 11 of us to try to come together, and get behind the single most important goal for us. And that's to have a Big South, conference schedule. But it's not something that I do not envy conference administrators, athletic directors. I'm glad to be a coach in this environment. I want to stay a coach because I've done more administration in the last couple months than I've ever done in my life. And I will leave that to you all.
Well, let's go back to maybe Kyle. And Bernie mentioned the word pod. What's the difference between a pod and a bubble for those our basketball fans listening?
Yeah, I think it's really the amount of security you're talking about. And even when we're talking about a bubble, as kind of Mike and Bernie were talking about, we're talking about student athletes here. These are not professional athletes that are dedicating, 24/7 to their sport. We've got student athletes that have to go to class. And so, we've talked about bubbles during breaks, where you don't have that academic obligation, but also, when you're back to class in January, you're not going to be in a bubble. I mean, there's some real limitations on being able to control it. So in a bubble environment, you would be trying to keep all your teams in one location, whether it's all on campus, and even possibly staying on campus, to all maybe in one hotel that you can try to have as much control as possible. But we're not going to have that $1 million to hire security to make sure there's no people going in and out. So it does land on the coaches for their responsibility, really be able to control that within their teams, to getting back, to the competition arena and practice arenas, and making sure those are as secure as possible. So with a bubble, you really try to secure that environment, control that environment as much as possible. A pod, as we've defined it, and we've been talking about it within our conference scheduling models, is really more of an opportunity to try to get a number of games in a short period of time. So you may be bringing in 4, 5, 6 teams to one location over the course of a long weekend and try to get 3 or 4 games in, that way, we're trying to ensure that we're getting that conference schedule in that's so important, as Mike was indicating. It's really a priority that we have to have a representative schedule, conference schedule in place to be able to seed our tournament at the end of the year, have a conference champion, and have our automatic representative to the NCAA championships.
Yeah. Hey, Bernie, speaking of whether it's a pod or a bubble, and we've all heard of different protocols, what for the Atlantic 10, whether whether Davidson's going to go play George Mason, y'all have certain protocols. What are you talking about, like just for regular conference play, or even for somebody, a non-conference game coming to an institution? What are your folks talking about with that?
We have a COVID-19 medical advisory board that has medical representatives from all 14 schools, and they've been up and running since early July, and specifically looking at our protocols for the sport of basketball. It's a little bit fuzzy right now because we're waiting to see. The NCAA is actually going to come out with protocols on Friday of this week as it relates to the sport of basketball. So our COVID group has been working in advance, and things that are being talked about right now is, obviously the ability for teams to be able to limit the time that they are on the road, maybe even limit being in a quote unquote hotel the night prior to a game, which would be a little bit different of chartering in, being able to play game day and then chartering right back out so that you get back to your own secure and safe environment and have as limited exposure to anyone that you really don't know what they have been doing in the area of health and safety. In addition to that, we've actually talked a little bit, even in terms of arrival at arenas. We've talked about what the actual playing surface area itself, the separation of the team benches, the separations of the scorer's table, the separation of any of the support personnel. Some of the things we're going to take and we're going to utilize from the NBA $1 million bubbles that we're seeing is they're actually, coding everyone with wristbands so that you clearly know who has access to the actual teams, coaching staff, and medical staff that's right there actually competing, and then what individuals, almost like credentials for a tournament, but we'll almost have credentials during regular season that will have to be worn and very visible to be able to protect the health and safety of the student athletes. So we're looking at a lot of different scenarios like that to be able to ensure the safety. We're also looking at, we're changing our post interviews, no media in the locker rooms. After games, typically you've got 10 minutes cooling down, and then press can go in and interview student athletes or coaches. All of that's going to be done virtually. So there'll be no face-to-face interaction between any type of media personnel and the student athletes or the coaches. So there are a few of the protocols that we're looking at right now that are up on the whiteboard that we'll be laying down as we wait for the national protocols to become public.
Yeah, and speaking of the new protocols, which will serve as guidance for us, and obviously institutions and conferences can have even what I call even more stricter or even additional protocols. Let's talk about testing a little bit, because you know, I think everybody on here knows that we're all testing student athletes. Certainly you do surveillance testing and, you know, those kinds of things. How is testing going to affect whether you're in a pod, a bubble, or an individual game? Kyle, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, testing will impact everybody because the NCAA, I fully expect with their protocols, they will end up being requirements. And even if they don't say they're requirements, you know, if you're not following closely the NCAA protocols, you know, you have increased exposure, increased risk. So fully expect that once official practice starts, all institutions will be required to test student athletes and others, you know, associated with the teams once a week. So, that the type of testing is yet to be determined, and maybe there'll be flexibility in terms of what that looks like. Once game week starts, it's 3 times a week. You know, we fully expect that that's going to be the case. So that is a challenge from a financial perspective. It's a challenge from a logistic perspective. When are you playing your games, and when are you testing? When are you traveling, and when are you testing? But clearly testing is going to be a centerpiece for our ability to move forward with the season. You know, if you're doing pods or bubbles or MTEs even, and you've got multiple games taking place, how is testing going to relate to that? Is rapid testing available where you could test the morning of the game and understand what that looks like? But then, of course, you have to deal with the results. And then how are you reacting to that? How are you able to continue to field a team to get on the court and play? What are you doing with those positive results? I mean, it gets obviously very complicated. But the biggest issue, and this kind of goes back to a lot of the protocols Bernie was talking about right now, I think is going to be with officials. You know, these basketball officials are traveling. They're going 5-6 games a week, different locations, hopping on and off airplanes. How are they going to be tested? How are we to be ensure that there's no COVID spreading taking place with officials? And that's going to be a real challenge.
That's a good point. Before we talk about scheduling, Honey and Mike, this is a question for both of you. We are no strangers to testing here at UNC Ashburn. We've got a great protocol. How is that affecting your practicing and what you're doing with our student athletes? Because obviously our protocols seem to be working, but as a coach, are you doing things differently because of testing? Talk a little bit. Mike, looks like you're ready to chime in first, so go ahead.
Yeah, you know, it's changed everything. You know, we don't use the locker room anymore, which, you know, in team sports, the locker room is a safe haven for teams, and it's an opportunity to build great relationships and talk about the coaches on days that you don't like them and things of that nature. But you know, it's changed everything. You know, one of the things that Bernadette's brought up is just the structure of how the court looks. And we really tried to go ahead and implement that in practice, really spacing all the chairs out. You know, as a coach, I was, well, this past Saturday, we played a little bit, and I went over there and I had my board, and my guys were like 9 feet away from me. I'm like trying to hold the board up. Like, can you guys, it's just stuff like that you don't really take into account until you're in the moment. So I think as coaches, as much as we can put not only our teams, but ourselves in those situations, you know, anytime we get a water break now, we hand sanitize. We call it a rinse and a pump. Get a rinse and a pump. And so just each guy on chair. And I tell you, as a coach, and I know Honey probably feels this way as well, you've really got to be cognizant of how your team is interacting with one another, because in a year like this, they just don't get the opportunity to spend as much time together. And that's not really what team sports is all about. So it looks completely different, but we've been fortunate so far. That's me knocking on wood.
Honey, what's your observation from?
I think a lot of what Mike said, it's funny when he referenced being the COVID police there for a while too, but that's, you know, it's what we have to do, and it's what we're willing to do as coaches to keep our players safe and the investment that you've made, Janet, and all ADs around the country, with knowing that we need the testing and we know we need to do it. And some of that's peace of mind. You know, we also have some players that are, you know, super smart and are going into the medical field, and they're very well versed in this, even better than I am sometimes, on what's coming out next. And just for them to have the peace of mind of how we're testing and what we're doing, and those results coming back positive, and you know how we're washing hands and all of those things, that it makes it great when you've got leadership in your program that already wants to do that to help keep your own teammates safe. And then I think that continues to grow throughout campus. We've got athletes, you know, asking other people to make sure they're staying safe. But I think the testing's been great. I think our players are getting more and more used to it, as you can, as you're getting swabbed, and know that that's a big part of keeping us safe.
Now, so let's go to scheduling a little bit. So I'll start with Bernie and Kyle, and then we'll get specific about UNC Asheville's scheduling. So we now know a date. We know we're going to play fewer games than we did previously, and hopefully we'll get to play all of those. You know, what's the A10 doing with teams that have MTEs, teams non-conference, and then Bernie, for your conference schedule, and then I'll ask Kyle the same thing for the Big South.
Yeah, what we're doing right now is we're allowing, since the official date of the 25th just got announced last week, the MTEs, and of our 14 programs, 13 of our schools are in MTEs. So they're scrambling right now to try to adjust their schedules, because the benefit of them playing in the MTE is they are going to one site and they are going to be able to get multiple games, and they're non-conference games, which will be very valuable at the end of the year when it comes to the NCAA selection committee work, as you well know, Janet. So the MTEs are sort of taking a little bit of priority, but in order to schedule on the new dates, each school's having to yet cancel additional games that perhaps were already scheduled between the 25th of November and, say, the 5th of December. So that kind of musical chairs is going on right now. And then they are also individually trying to reschedule the games that they're having to move to accommodate the MTEs right now. So once that happens, which it's all happening pretty quickly, like on a daily basis since last Thursday, once that happens, which I think the dust will settle probably by the end of this week, then we're going to take a good look at we have a set of open dates in December that were exam dates that we wouldn't be scheduling games. Most of our institutions are doing exams early. So the teams are actually free, and student athletes are available now. So we are looking at that pocket of dates to potentially move a set of conference games in there, and that would give us relief later in February. So they're all contingency planning right now, and I just have to really give credit to the ADs and the A10 and the coaches, and everybody has realized that, you know what, this is an unusual year, and there's not a lot of time for complaining, and there's not a lot of time for posturing right now, and we all need to work as a team from a conference perspective, and we got to go with the flow. And if we need to put a set of conference games before Christmas, then coaches, as Coach Morell knows, doesn't really like to do that, but our coaches know they're going to have to do it.
Yeah, we usually are always so concerned about fairness and competitive equity, right? You know, and especially, you know, working with the coaches and making sure that everything is the same for everybody. That's secondary this year. There's no question. We want to make sure we're playing and playing safely, and then we'll think about the fairness aspect to it. So, you know, we spend a lot of time, Janet, you know, talking about the importance of the conference season, getting the conference games in, and how much do we protect the non-conference opportunities vis-a-vis the conference schedule. So conference opportunities are important. Certainly non-conference opportunities are important, as Bernie's indicated, in terms of building your resume for consideration and selection and seating at the end of the year. And so we want to, you know, assist our institutions in continuing to protect those. In addition, of course, everybody knows that some of those games, you know, are guarantee games, are revenue opportunities for our institutions. And maybe not as much this year, since there may not be fans attending a lot of these games. but there still are some opportunities out there that we understand that are important to our institution. So we've been trying to balance how to protect those at the same time, really paying attention to the priority of our conference season. So what we just decided yesterday was that we are going to move some conference games into the December pre-Christmas timeframe. And so the challenge now is trying to, as Bernie was indicating, work out when will those games be played, when will there be opportunities, around what's happening non-conference wise as well. So we just begun that process. And then when we get to post-Christmas, it's all about the conference. And then, as we've been talking about, what does that look like? Are we able to do single games, or do we think about going to a bubble concept after the Christmas break? Do we talk about the pods where we're able to get those games in, more games at one time to be able to allow us to make sure that we are actually getting that representative conference schedule in?
Well, as Bernie, as both you and Kyle know, Asheville, kudos to Demp and our sports commission. We've got the Maui coming, so we're going to have some practice in bubbling. So we've got a great location here for whenever conferences decide what they want to do. We certainly love to host. I also want, before I turn to Honey and Mike, those of you that are watching along, if you want to type in a question, David Jandrew is going to, at the end, we'll ask any questions that may be something you're particularly interested in. So please type in the question. So Honey, let's start with you first. Okay, so now we know 20 games and we know we're not in MTE. What does your schedule look like? What you're doing?
It's the good thing is we already had a couple of games scheduled. We had a game with Western scheduled on the 25th, so we hope that's going to hold true. And we had several games that were somewhat local already that were already going to be day trips, which was going to be great for us to be able to continue that same schedule. App State and some of the other ones. Florida, I think, still wants to try to come here if they can, which would still be great. We'd love to have them, because you don't know, like everybody's talked about, there's no blueprint for this. By the time December comes around, we might actually be able to have some fans in the stands. Who knows? So, it's like these guys said, it's once we've got that date and we know when our first conference game, we'll know where we need to fill in other places. But like Micah said in other Zooms, I'm excited to play. It's just great opportunity for our kids, and goodness, you don't know if you're going to have to do this bubble or this scenario again. And so now we can say we've coached through a bubble, or we've coached through it. So I'm just excited for the opportunity to do that. To be honest, I think that's all our kids want, is just an opportunity in a safe environment.
Yeah, and for those listening in, the NCAA, they have a trademark on March Madness, but they also now have a trademark on Battle in the Bubble. So maybe that's something to come. Mike blows up my phone every day with a lot of text messages about scheduling. So Mike, talk about our men's basketball schedule.
Yeah, it's, I think like everything else here, it's fluid, and being on all these Zoom calls, one thing that I've really found interesting is that, obviously our, part of our schedule is to be able to try to go out and generate money. And that is different this year, but it's really interesting to converse with the Power 5 schools right now and get their feedback on what their protocols are. And obviously it's a different year in terms of what those finances look like. So we had 2 of those games pre November 25th. So, and those schools aren't ready to reschedule yet. And having Bernadette on here, it takes me back. I did scheduling at VCU in 2013 and 14. And Bernadette, I don't know if you remember this, we had the #1 non-conference strength of schedule in the country that year. And we were a 5 seed. But, I think for coaches everywhere, like at that level, I know in her league, like the whole thing is like, we have to have opportunities to play some of the best teams in the country. Like that was our whole mindset when we were at VCU. We want to get on, we don't care where it's at. Like we'll play University of Virginia on the moon. We just want to play them. We don't care where it's at. And so here, our big deal as coaches has been, we want to see play as many league games as we can, because those are the schools we trust the most. And I think that there's probably, our schedule still has a lot of changes left. Like we said, we've made the decision to go to 20, knowing we probably aren't going to play that many. So we could schedule 22 plus and probably still be under the mandate of 25 or 27. So, you know, right now we've got a lot of games after the 25th that are still locked in. But as Kyle's alluded, I think there's still a lot of fluidity that's going to come with what our schedule actually looks like. And everybody knows we were supposed to open up University of North Carolina on November 10th. And for us, like, you know, we really wanted to play that game, but also, you know, it generates a lot of funds. And right now, you know, that game is fluid.
Yeah, Mike, why don't you explain to our friends that are listening, because we're talking about 25 games, but if you play in the MTE, sort of explain why you might can play 27.
Yeah, so in a normal year, the bare minimum of games you can play is 29. This year it's 25. And you've heard the term MTE a lot on this call, and that's code for multi-team event. And that could be a 4-team event, it could be an 8-team event, depending on what time of event that it is. But it's an opportunity to, in Bernadette's league, at VCU, how we always looked at it was an opportunity for us to go play some of the Power 5 schools and get what they call quality wins. And here at our level, it's still that type of opportunity in the Big South, but you can also raise some money for your program. You can get paid out of those, or in our case this year, we were supposed to play in an MTE with all mid-majors and go to one place and get 3 games. And if you're in an MTE this year, you can play as many as 27. If you're not in an MTE, then you cannot play any more than 25. So right now we are still in an MTE, so we have the opportunity to play 27.
So something both, I think Mike mentioned and Kyle mentioned, and Bernie, I'll throw this out to you because your schools do this some, game guarantees with the uncertainty about no fans, and we've all across the country, I mean, you're not immune to this. We know that athletics budgets are just, you know, the revenue streams are not what they were a year ago. Are game guarantees, what do you see like this year and for the future?
Game guarantees for this year are getting adjusted all over the place. I just heard late last night, one of the Power 5 conferences made a decision that they were not going to pay any more than $35,000 for a men's game guarantee or $18,000 for a women's game guarantee, which is, you know, 3 times less than what they typically would have been paying. In our league right now, our coaches and schools haven't talked a lot. We do buy a significant number of games. And so we are on the paying end of the game guarantees. Obviously, with the start of the season getting delayed, you know, 4 of those games were in the first 2 weeks of the year. They were the first couple of home games, and those games have gone away on our schedules. So obviously our institutions aren't paying because the games aren't there anymore. However, I think if they are retaining any of those games later on in the schedule in December, I would not be surprised, although I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if those game guarantees are somewhat adjusted down with a mutual agreement to, you know, if you want to play the game, which we all need the game, then I think everybody has to cooperate and understand that if the revenue's not there on the ticket sales, the guarantee has to get adjusted to some degree.
Kyle, I know you've been talking to all of us athletic directors and you've seen what was our schedules for game guarantee. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I'm hearing the exact same things, but there's just no certainty yet exactly what that's going to be. So everybody expects that the guarantees are going to be adjusted in some form or fashion. It just depends on how much, whether it's worthwhile or not for our institutions to still participate and keep those games on their schedule. So I think there's still some thinking and conversations that some of our ADs have had that there's still some opportunity for generating revenue through some of those games. Others, maybe just going away completely. But, Janet, you referenced the economic devastation that we've been facing this year. And so, we're scrambling to figure out any way that we can generate revenue. I think it's just really critical for the health of our programs. So certainly not what they have been, not what you normally expect, but there's still some opportunity from what I'm hearing right now. But again, it's by the time we get to December, who knows what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and honey, let's start moving forward a little bit. We get a conference season in. For coaches, how important is a conference tournament? Because the way we are set up, and I'll ask Bernie how her conference does this, we obviously get an automatic qualifier, and it's usually the conference champion. It's not the regular season champion, it's the conference. So how important is having a conference championship to you and the other women coaches?
I think it's huge, especially in our conference. I think you have a ton of parity, especially maybe in the top half or so. And, someone might have some injuries or have some things going on through your regular season, or you might get it going like we did a few years ago towards the end of the season. And you want that opportunity. And it's just such an exciting time for your players to play in a tournament setting. So like us and like Mike, we're not playing in a tournament this year. So that's the only atmosphere our players are going to have when you're in that tournament atmosphere, multiple games. Everything's kind of riding on it, and it's always been a big thing for us. Of course, we've done well in the tournament in the past few years. So of course, somebody that's done well and has gotten to the big dance a few times because we won the tournament. Of course, I'm all for it, but I just think it's such a huge experience for our players that it's just it's worth it to do it if at all possible, do it safely, especially for programs or conferences like us. Like I said, when you've got parity, where you've got maybe any of your top 4, 5, 6 teams could win it and still have a good showing in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. Mike, what's your thoughts about Big South Championship tournament?
Yeah, tournament time, and that's why a lot of our guys do it, the opportunity to play in the NCAA tournament. Although I do think this year it's a little bit different, and I might be in the minority on this, but I think I would actually prefer the AQ this year to be who wins the regular season if we get to a certain amount of games, because I kind of feel like the body of work this year is so important, because your team could look so different at different points of time. We're all going to probably be down a player or two to COVID, maybe a coach or two. You don't know this year. I was actually talking to Shaka the other day. He's like, I got to figure out who's going to coach my team if I get COVID. It's like those are actually things that you have to think about this year. I still think we should definitely have a conference tournament. And we've tossed around a few different ideas on this, but you also, I don't know if it's 4 teams or 8 teams or, the ESPN opportunity for us, in that championship game is huge. And it's really our conference's time to shine. And it's always been a great game. So I see both sides of it, definitely. Whoever gets the AQ at a conference tournament, in my opinion, has to happen, because that's what March is all about.
So Bernie, I know we haven't played the season yet, but have y'all had conversations about the A10 women's basketball conference tournament and the men's?
We have, and related to your previous question, the NCAA Council and the board approved a change with declaring, as you all may or may not know, conference offices have to designate AQ status in August of each year. But that decision has been pushed back so that every sport, including men's and women's basketball, conferences can wait until 2 weeks prior to the selection committee meeting to declare their AQ. So I think that's going to be tremendously helpful to everyone to be able to get right to the end of the season, to be able to address it like what Coach was just saying. Conferences that traditionally say your tournament champion is your AQ may very well say 2 weeks at the end of the season, you know what, we want it to be our regular season champ. So I think that flexibility is important. We have talked about it in terms of men's and women's. Our men's tournament is up at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. And right now they have not had any outside events. It's an NBA arena. I think you might have seen just this morning, Adam Silver actually, put out on Twitter that the NBA season may not even start until January 1st. So I think that has to do with the capacity. Right now in the county in New York, there can only be 50 people in a indoor facility. So obviously there can't even be a game in Barclays right now. So we're hoping that time is our friend and we're still going to be able to have our championship as we normally would, because we have a tremendous number of national televised games. We have 11 nationally televised games during that window. The women's a little bit different. We play our first 6 games on home sites. So we have teams flying all over, and the women's committee right now is considering for this year to move everything to one campus site to eliminate travel. Now that hasn't been approved, but it's being talked about by our subcommittee of women's basketball administrators. And I think that's a direction you may see our athletic directors go down, so that we just eliminate those first 6 trips for those seeded teams at that point in time.
So Kyle, Big South Championship.
Yeah, in all of our sports, we've been talking about, do we have a tournament this year or not? Because in actually all of our championships, except for basketball, we've reduced it to just the final 4 teams. And so that was a decision made back last spring. But what we're finding is that a large majority of our coaches still want to have the postseason tournament, still want to declare our champion and our AQ through the tournament. The men's basketball championship for the Big South is the key gem in our ESPN deal. And so, if we decided not to do that, that would be significant from a financial perspective for us. And so not to diminish the important experience of our student athletes, whether it's regular season or postseason, but that's something we got to consider. And that's really important to the conference. And so, as we look at it, we are looking forward to the championships. There is flexibility, as Bernie indicates, in terms of declaring your AQ, but it would have to be pretty significant for us to move away from that, I would think. And right now, we're talking about, do we have to bubble up for the championship or not? And so, getting back to the theme of the call here, is that a bubble or not? What does that look like? We have to prepare for that, understand what that looks like. We are at home sites again this year. We put off our Charlotte opportunity for a year. Do we go just to one site for all the games, regardless of who advances in the tournament, and just play at the number 1 seed? So those are the kind of things we're talking about. And the other thing is, we talk about the scheduling and having that week before the tournament being an open week. Maybe that's smart, because we can deal with COVID issues and have everybody back healthy for the season-ending championship.
Yeah, and I think our coaches recommended that, and a week before the men's championship is going to sort of be an open week or makeup week, but actually could be a time where you are really quarantining your team and getting them ready to go into some kind of bubble or controlled environment. So that's a good point. Kyle, since you and Mike and Bernie mentioned TV2, talk a little bit because our Bulldogs, we don't know how many of our Bulldogs are going to be able to come to Kimmel Arena or not. So talk about how important are ESPN Plus and those opportunities to watch basketball, even if you can't be here in person.
Well, absolutely. And all of our basketball games, it's a conference requirement that they're on. If they're not otherwise televised through ESPN, they're going to be on ESPN Plus. And kudos to our institutions for the great job they do in producing those games and getting those on ESPN Plus. So they will be available. And there's even discussion about, should we put on inter-squad scrimmages on ESPN Plus as well as the regular season games. So that exposure is really important. Obviously, we've been with a long-standing partner with ESPN for a long period of time. They've been great, and so these opportunities on the ESPN Plus have really helped our institutions and our student athletes.
Yeah, I got one more question, and then we're going to David's going to ask a couple questions of people, and then we'll close. Bernie, you're a member of the men's basketball committee. And we know the number of games that we have to watch and how important those are. From a men's basketball committee perspective, how are you going to do your work this year? What's the thoughts coming from the committee?
Well, the thoughts are that obviously, the conference monitoring program has been very important. And for those of you listening and watching this, the 10 basketball committee members, or really 9, the chair isn't assigned, but 9 of us, we get all 32 conferences divided up, and we actually monitor and we watch, and we really know those conferences inside and out. So this year it's going to be critically important not only to do our own monitoring, but we've talked about we're going to have to really make sure that we are so informed of what other conference teams are doing as well, because if there's a smaller number of non-conference games and we don't have that evaluation tool to be able to really compare teams between leagues, then we're really going to need to have to bear down and almost be a conference monitor for all of the leagues. The net will become less valuable the fewer non-conference games that teams play. So it would be valuable in terms of conference games, but your conference rankings and standings define that for you anyway. So I do think that that's going to be critically important. And we've talked about it a lot in the committee. And we have been trying to reassure the NABC and all the commissioners that, the committee is committed to, really bearing down, whether it's watching the games on ESPN Plus or on the stadiums or on the Flow Sports or all of our national TV networks. This year is probably going to be more important or as important as ever for the committee members to know the depth and the breadth of the scope of men's basketball nationwide, and not just for the 7 conferences we're monitoring.
Yeah, that's great. David, if you want to come off of mute and ask a couple of those questions.
Thank you, Janet. The first one's for Mike and Honey. What are some new skills that you're being forced to learn because of the changes you're facing? And are there opportunities that all of these difficulties are providing your programs?
Well, first of all, coaching through a mask and learning how to yell louder through a mask, I think that's number one. And I've got a face shield I'm going to try out today. Mike mentioned it too, like, you get kids in a huddle and, they're spread out even more. We do foot fives. Mike does a great job of building energy in his program, and we're trying to do the same thing. But, you're taking away high fives and a lot of that interaction between your teammates. So how do you continue to generate energy and excitement in practice? Those are things I think we're continuing to learn. And then I think the flexibility piece, we've talked a lot about that with our players. We need to be as interchangeable and adaptable and flexible as we can. Mike already mentioned this before, but you could have players out, coaches out. So that's one of the things that we've been talking about since day one is what are we doing to make sure that we're ready for what's next and how we need to adapt and be flexible.
I started writing in a journal for the first time. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. It was one of those COVID things. And in my journal, I go back and read it. And I keep telling myself, like in June and July, to be aware, to be prepared to adapt, to be fluid. And I'm really struggling with that right now. So that's, I know that that's probably not like but it is a skill and it is a tool and it is something that I'm really trying to do every single day. And it's not just COVID. And I can't reiterate that enough. Like for us, our players were at home for almost 5 months. And now you get them back here. Well, the first 3 weeks, we literally did nothing really physical with them just to try to get their bodies back to where they can compete. And we've had a lot of knick-knack injuries on top of policing COVID. And so, just trying to take a deep breath and just be aware and understand. And I think it's really important that, it's not singular to UNC Asheville. It's not singular to, Honey Brown and her team. We're all dealing with this, and just not try to be, coaches want it cookie cutter. We want to know exactly what's going on today and what's going on. And that's just not the situation right now. So that's the biggest skill for me. I would give myself a C right now.
Mike, this next question is for
I'm trending upward.
This next question is for you also. Talk about the pros and cons of you mentioned the North Carolina game, the pros and cons of playing that game this year versus trying to reschedule it for the future.
Yeah, well, that was really Janet. That wasn't me. Her relationship with Chapel Hill got us that game, and we've discussed that. And I will say this to North Carolina and Coach Williams, they've always just been unbelievable trying to take care of in-state schools, and obviously he's from here, and so we have both of us have discussed that. I think right now in this climate, if we can get the game, we want to play the game. It's a road, it's a day trip, and Bernadette was talking about, in her league, they can charter, to games, fly in there on a private plane and get out of there. Well, for us, that's a day trip. Get in there on a bus and get out in the same day. So our other bye game that we still currently have on the schedule is Miami. And that's a little bit different situation. And so, yeah, we've discussed that. And I think we both hope that if that game doesn't happen this year, that we'll definitely see it on the schedule next.
And then the next question for Bernie and Kyle, do you all see any of the changes that have come about due to COVID sticking with us when we get back to quote unquote normal?
Go ahead, Bernie.
I think the use of technology. I think we've all upped our game on the use of technology. I keep teasing my two top assistants. They better be worried because I'm learning to do a whole lot on my own that I've never even been close to doing on my own. So I think that's going to stick. And I think it's been a benefit to all of us in a lot of different, regards. I think the other thing that is going to stick is the realization, and I'd be interested in the coach's perspective on this, but from a conference perspective, and I'm seeing with the schools is, this appreciation for, we all can be resilient and we can do a lot with the basics. We've all maybe been very spoiled over the last 10 years. And we've had a lot of bells and whistles and been able to do a lot of fancy things. And we've had to really reset and scale back. And we're able to be very effective and really kind of hone in on the basics of what is most important in terms of getting our jobs done, protecting our student athletes, being great leaders. And I think that is kind of a game changer that all of us professionally are going through right now. So I think those are the two things I would say will stick.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I was going to say technology as well. As much as Zoom has become our friend here, I just really prefer face-to-face, communication and meeting with people. Not that we won't use Zoom more than we did pre-COVID. I think we will. But the other thing I was reading was that this company called Pacquiao, who's in the ticketing business, who their mobile ticketing clients went from 1 to 70 in just this fall for football that's taking place out there. So when you talk about technology, the advances that are coming, on those fronts, I think it's really going to be significant. Those obviously are going to stick around.
All right, thank you. We're gonna wind this down, and I'm gonna start with Mike first. Anything you want to say to the Bulldog fans who tuned in today? Any parting words?
Yeah, just appreciation. I think it's always, especially in these times, Bernadette just said something that it reminded me of a quote, in adverse situations really narrow the focus and what's most important. And when you're at a place like this, it really makes you thankful. And I would say this without Janet, just to have leadership and communication, because we just don't get the opportunity to lead our teams without, the proper communication from the people above us. But, it's been a tough year, I think, for everybody from just a basketball family, here. but also just tough for people in general. So the fact that we're even talking about playing basketball, like, makes me want to flip my desk over right now. I mean, just the fact that we're actually talking about having basketball games, you know, and I hope all the people understand how much work just goes into the opportunity to talk about them. Now let's get there and let's play them, and the excitement for me, you know, and the appreciation that I have for, I can't see who all's on this call, but 70 plus people it's real, and we're grateful for it.
Honey, what's your parting thoughts to our Bulldog friends?
Oh, we missed you guys, and you know, miss seeing people around, you know, practice and, you know, our fantasy camp that we always have, and just camp in general. I think our players, and like Mike's players, we're you know, hopefully good ambassadors of the university and what we're trying to do with COVID, and you know, hopefully a bright light in the community, and how we're continuing to move forward with, hopefully, like Mike said, playing and then bringing some more excitement to Asheville, even if it's by ESPN Plus or whatever it might be, but giving people an opportunity to see a bright light and good things happening, because like Mike referenced, there's been a lot of unfortunate things because of this virus, and financially and sickness. So you hope that that everybody realizes that we're trying our best to be that bright light for everybody, and build some excitement coming up in the next few months.
Bernie, now you get to do a big plug for the A10. What, for the folks down here who maybe some of them are graduates or alums of Davidson or some of your other schools, George Mason, what would you like for us to know about the Atlantic 10 basketball for this year?
You know what? I don't think that your folks in right now want to hear about the A10, because I want to tell them about the Big South and about you, Janet. And let me just say that, you know, I've been in this business 39 years, and, you know, your leadership right now, you've got one of the best commissioners in the country with Kyle. I've known him for many, many, many years, and see him work on a national level. Janet, your work nationally and what you've done to open doors for so many women, and, you know, your work on the basketball committee. You got a shout out when I did a radio interview this morning. Me being on the committee with you my first year, which was 2 years ago, was fabulous. And Mike and Honey, both great coaches. So I would say to everybody, you know, on this Zoom call to, you know, support your Bulldogs and do whatever you can, because times are tough, and, you know, everybody needs to band together and be on the same team. And it's a pleasure visiting and being with you all today.
Oh, thank you so much, Bernie. Kyle, I purposely left you last. 25 years as our commissioner of the Big South. You got a chance to talk to some folks that have been around for a lot of those years, I'm sure, on this, and some are new to the Big South. What would you like to share?
Well, first of all, Bernie's way too humble. I mean, she is such a great leader in college athletics, and has meant so much to me personally, certainly, and to all of us in college athletics with her leadership and what she's done. You know, certainly at the A10 now, and before that, we worked with her in the ACC. So she is somebody that's a great friend, and you know, I think you all saw that today on the call. What a great leader she is in college athletics. We're really excited in the Big South Conference. And I'm always excited to come to Asheville. A lot of friends over the 25 years that I've been able to make up there. Great fans, great supporters of the program. I mean, I'm always so impressed with the passion the Bulldog fans have, and the excitement that they have for athletics up there in Asheville. So, and I will second that. You've got unbelievable leaders on campus, and Janet has done such an outstanding job representing UNC Asheville within the conference and nationally. What a tremendous leader. She keeps me on my toes, calls me on a daily basis with all kinds of crazy ideas, you know, which is great. You know, I encourage that. You know, that's wonderful. And to be able to see the job that Mike has done with the program, to keep that tradition going with UNC Asheville men's basketball. And Honey, we're looking forward to your leadership and what you're going to be able to do. So, you know, it's UNC Asheville means a lot to the Big South Conference. And, you know, we've been in the league for, 35 years now. And so we're looking forward to this basketball season. We're looking forward to it. We're jumping on our chairs, Mike. You're absolutely right. And I'm hoping that I will be there in person to see you play. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're hoping that we'll be bubbling up here or some potting up here in Asheville. And once again, I want to thank all our friends who are on. We're going a little past time, but I also want to, I know Demp's on here and some of others who worked on getting the Maui Invitational. Because remember, we just love basketball in Asheville. That's a true thing. We just love our basketball. So thanks for everybody. And Bernie and Kyle, thank you again. For your friendship and being on here and helping us to really promote what a great sport of basketball. So thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
My pleasure.